particular thanks to the Humanities Center for providing these opportunities to present research in progress, which this indeed is. So I really look forward to hopefully discussion at the end and suggestions both for sort of further background materials or interpretive things that I might not have yet noticed in these two films that I'm working on. And I also want to thank in advance all the people who've come in spite of the fact that they have to hoof it back to Manoogian or other areas of campus for classes at 1:25. So thank you so much for joining us in advance. And if you want to know how things turn out, I'll be happy to fill you in on the end. The surprising ending. So today's presentation focuses on two films, E Laura fai son vir, The Wind Blows Round, 2005, and La Giusta Distanza, The Right Distance, 2007. If you have an ear for Italian, you might notice that the first title doesn't actually sound like Italian, and it's not. It's Occitan. The film is set in the Valle Maira, in a valley in the Occitan Alps, not far from Turin and on the border with France. So it's a liminal space on the edges of Italy. And this is supposedly the only film ever made in the Lingua Doc. The Right Distance, instead, is set on the Po River in the Polesine, a wetland region where Italy's longest river dumps into the Adriatic Sea. Both films begin with a visual introduction to the landscapes they're set in. The first is curving along an alpine road through tunnels in a bumpy handheld shot, and sweeping along the winding Po River in a slow pan from above in the second. Ecologically speaking, both of these extraordinary settings are known as ecotones. Mountain ranges and wetlands form edge zones. Ecotones are transition areas between adjacent biotic communities, and as such, they're among the richest of habitats, characterized by exceptional biodiversity. Animals frequent ecotones because they can find the greatest variety of food and shelter in the varied environments on each side of the border. According to ecofeminist Florence Krull, quote, "To an ecologist, the edge effect carries the connotation of the complex interplay of life forces where plant communities and the creatures they support intermingle in mosaics or change abruptly," end quote. So from this description, it's hopefully evident that the concept of the ecotone is a rich one, theoretically speaking, for its in-betweenness, its ability to span two different ecological registers, and its physical presence as change. But the word ecotone derives from the ancient Greek word for tension, and in fact, in the midst of the spaces, there also lies a strain that threatens to divide communities of human and non-human inhabitants. Discordance and the encounters between communities, biotic and cultural, are at the center of these two films. The Right Distance and The Wind Blows Round begin in ecologically significant environments. They launch narratives of traditional Italian communities and encounters with others. Like many contemporary Italian films, they map a changing landscape, telling stories of a globalized Italy in the throes of a national cultural identity crisis. So The Right Distance tells the story of Mara, who's the woman in the flyer, not we, a beautiful young elementary school teacher from Milan, assigned for a short-term assignment in a fictional rural community called Conca d'Albero. Mara eventually enters into a brief relationship with Hassan, a Tunisian immigrant who runs a garage in town. Mara, Hassan, and the rest of the town's inhabitants are carefully observed by Giovanni, an aspiring young journalist who reports their goings about in the regional newspaper. At the helm of The Right Distance, then, we find a mobile female protagonist who, after a stay in Conca d'Albero, plans to travel to Brazil to work in a co-op. The small town also features a Tunisian mechanic, a Moroccan man who makes amazing piadine, which is a sort of Italian quesadilla, and a local tobacconist married to a woman from Romania. When Mara arrives in town, the diverse, globalized microcosm of Italy appears to exist in relative peace. But as the narrative unfolds, the piece is revealed to be fragile, the fruit of a conditional hospitality that fails to extend equally to all. When Mara is found dead in the Po River, sorry for the spoilers, by the way, there are still mysteries in the films if you want to watch them, Hassan is instantly suspected by officials, but also significantly not defended by the people with whom he lived amicably for years. Giovanni's investigative journalism proves his innocence at the end of the film, but Hassan is dead, having committed suicide in despair after an unsuccessful court appeal. The Wind Blows Round features Philippe Perrault, a French cheesemaker and former professor of philosophy, who who decides to relocate his family from the Pyrenees to the Alps because a nuclear power facility is being constructed near their home. The small alpine village he chooses as their destination is, like many small Italian towns, almost devoid of human inhabitants except in the summer, when people flock in for 2 weeks of relaxation in the country. A divided town council decides to help Philippe in his relocation, and we see the fluid boundaries of the European Union initially open to accept this new community member. Ultimately, this hospitality, too, turns out to be conditional, and the townspeople, leery of a bohemian family, begin to make their lives unpleasant and at last run them out of town. Both films recount the story of discomfort with change, fear of contamination, alarm at transgression of boundaries, unwittingly but determinedly policed. Scholar Graziella Parati notes that Minister Claudio Martelli proposed new immigration laws in the 90s, known as sanatoria, laws intended to heal or sanare the diseased body of multicultural Italy. Parati points out that this terminology, borrowed from, quote, the rhetoric of illness and adopted in the discussion of the emergenza immigrazione, immigration emergency, is based on the assumption that becoming a country of immigration involves the contamination of its almost monocultural past and present, end quote. So my descriptions of the two films here just took an anthropocentric tack, probably the most common in interpreting works that recount crises of globalization, regionalism, and cohabitation in contemporary settings. But the films also tell more marginal, at least narratively speaking, stories of non-human animals in the communities that I suggest are also relevant to understanding the crises at their center. As such, they call attention to the crisis of humanism that post-humanist philosophers, including Donna Haraway and Roberto Marchesini, recognize as a subject of ethical importance in the new millennium. Haraway's work focuses on boundaries and their transgression, and her theories of hybrid humans work against what she calls the species boundaries and sterilization of category deviance prevalent in techno-humanism. The Companion Species Manifesto and When Species Meet, two of her more recent works, speak out against the culturally normal fantasy of, quote, human exceptionalism, which she describes as the premise that humanity alone is not a spatial and temporal web of interspecies dependencies. Echoing this concern with humanism's obsession with the superior status of human animals, Marchesini defines post-humanism as a thinking that and this is my translation, inaugurates a different interpretation of knowledge, no longer as domination of the world, but rather as conjugation with the world, which means that every process of knowledge increases our level of contamination, dissolves us further into the non-human, increases our degree of anthropodecentrism, unites us evermore with the destinies of other entities. So my critical work begins with a widening of my own interpretive framework, attempting to veer from the analysis of events important just to the human community to consider those that touch non-human animals in these films. This post-humanist view allows me to focus on events that reveal in stark colors the film's preoccupations with the tendency of small communities to enclose themselves within narrow boundaries. So I'm going to talk first about the right distance, in which the non-human animal presence is a critical but fairly marginal side plot. And we'll then talk about The Wind Blows Round, in which companionable cohabitation is really at the center of the narrative. Within the first 5 minutes of The Right Distance, even before Mara arrives in town, we learn that a mysterious criminal has been shooting and killing dogs in the area. Throughout the film, the events of the narrative are punctuated with verbal and visual accounts of slain canines, on several occasions being regarded by children who poke them curiously or carry them away on improvised litters. These recurrent killings clearly trouble the townspeople to some extent, since they write about the murders in the newspaper and recall anecdotally that the Mostro di Milwaukee, presumably serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, got his start killing dogs. This anecdote about the vicious killings is significant because it demonstrates that the slaughter of the dogs seems to be a crime primarily because it might relate to violence a human individual would be capable of committing against another human animal, a pathology perhaps communicable to a human audience, but only subject of genuine concern in that case. The dead dogs reappear on screen time after time at significant moments. The first shortly after Mara arrives in town, she sees another just before she's murdered,